Okay. So our pancakes to go and 2 boxes. And that. All right. All right. We'll take that with you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go. Can you get out there? Wait, here you go. Oh, thank you. Good night.
Hey there. Do we need to keep this recording going?
Well, it needs to be on because we put it on the website after.
Uh-huh. We can't start it when the webinar starts.
No, you can stop it. Just don't forget.
Try to.
All right, we all got it.
And I'm Sandra Fish. I'm kind of trying to arrange monthly webinars with Journalism and Women's Symposium this year. And I'm really excited about this, to have Jill Geisler. And I haven't prepared an introduction because to me, she needs no introduction. She's like one of the best trainers in journalism ever and does so much great work for all of us. And I'm very excited about this. I'm going to take it away, Jill.
Well, hi, everybody. I've met some of you in person over the years. I'm just delighted to be with you. My background is in broadcast journalism. I was a reporter and a photographer and a producer and an anchor. And then they made me news director way back in 1978 when they weren't giving jobs to girls. And I'm going to say girls at that time because that's what they called us. And in 1978, there were maybe 5 of us in the country. And so I learned a lot during that time and I was very young as a manager, and I had to find my voice. Hi, Janita, good to have you up. See you on camera. Okay, we're seeing you now. So I had to find my voice. I spent 25 years in that newsroom building a culture that was very important to me, to build a positive newsroom culture where we really relied on ethics and integrity and enterprise journalism. And we really believed in having fun, and we believed in the power of families. It was run by 2 women, right? It was and that was somewhat unknown at the time. So people would be surprised that there was a female-led newsroom. Did that for 25 years, and then was invited by the Poynter Institute to come on board there and lead its leadership and management programs, which I did for 16 years and have been in newsrooms from Boston to the Kingdom of Bhutan. And then in 2015 was asked by Loyola to accept its inaugural Bill Plante Chair in Leadership and Media Integrity. So that's what I do at Loyola. I still teach professionals. I work with news organizations all the time. I do a masterclass for media managers, which I'll tell you about later. But I also accepted a fellowship 5 years ago, and which is now over, but I was with the Freedom Forum and its Power Shift project, which was done in the wake of the Me Too scandals in media, and created curriculum that went into newsrooms all across the country to talk about healthier, safer workplaces. And one of the things that was a part of that curriculum was, how do we talk to each other, right? And how do we talk in the moment when something comes up that's problematic, right? You hear something, or you know something is wrong and you want to bring it up, but how do you find the right words to make sure that you're going to have the best possible resolution? And that can be anything from witnessing harassment, right? Being an active bystander, or whether it's just hearing someone say something that you believe to be a microaggression. Now, I'm going to tell you that I had that experience just at this time yesterday in a Zoom room just like this with a group of graduate students who were in marketing. And I was there to talk with them about interviewing, because their capstone class requires them to do a massive project. And a part of it is identifying someone in the industry. And they were all in strategic global communications, to find someone and interview that person and do a really good in-depth interview about trends in the industry. So I asked them when we started, have any of you set up your interviews, and tell me, if so, tell me about it. And one of the students said to me, he raised his hand and he said, yes, I have mine. I've got a girl and she's an entrepreneur. She's a CEO of a company. And I want to be a CEO. I want to be an entrepreneur myself. And I really respect what she's done. So I've sent her a message, and she was just great in the way she responded. And I listened to it all, and I knew I had a decision to make in that moment, right? I don't know him. I was a guest lecturer. He had a mask on, but what I could see, because wherever he was, he needed to be masked. I believe he was a gentleman of color. So I'm this white lady in Wisconsin, and I'm now going to be speaking in a response to something. And I'm talking across difference. And so my answer to him was, well, it sounds like you've done a really good job on getting that interview. And you identified someone, and women are underrepresented in CEO roles and in entrepreneurship. So it's great that you're going to be getting your information and maybe, giving a little focus on this person. Good for you for getting that. We'll talk about how to prepare for your interview. And now I just want to say something, and I want to say it to you as a friend, and I want to say it to you with respect. When you first spoke, you said you had lined up a girl. And over the years, even if you meant nothing by it, there are people who mean something by it when they call women girls. It diminishes them. It suggests that, we'll have the girls at the front desk handle it, or have the girls in design do that. And it diminishes them. You may not mean to do that, and I don't think you did, but we don't say things like, go check on the boys, right? We oftentimes just diminish women. And so I know you wouldn't want to do that, and I wouldn't be a good friend if I didn't tell you about that. I said, we've grown up saying guys and gals, and we may say, girl boss to each other. But I would encourage you not to use that word when you are interviewing her or writing about her. And he said, oh my gosh, thank you. No, I wouldn't do that. But then I got a little side message in the chat from one of the women in the class who said, thank you so much for addressing that. And again, that falls into the category of microaggressions. If it's a microaggression, we don't want to destroy the person, right? We may still feel like those microaggressions build up. I always say that, you know, when we say microaggression, that word isn't even that's not necessarily a good word, because micro seems like it's tiny. And we think of aggression like a big knife. Well, a needle still can do a lot of damage, especially if you never know when it's coming and you never know who's going to do it, but they poke you on the way past, right? And those things add up. And then you don't want to be where you are anymore. And so the important thing for us is to figure out how in the moment to say something. I can tell you another example. When I was at Pointer, I was doing a seminar for new managers, and we were at a U-shape, they're all on a U-shaped table. And at one point, one of the women in the seminar was talking about how she had made a mistake of some sort. And she said, you know, and I did it and I felt so, oh my gosh, I felt so retarded. And this would have been some time ago. So I'm certain that, you know, maybe times have changed, but still at this moment, it was as wrong then as it is now, right? And so I let her finish. And now I'm leading this group. And I realized that, you know, if you're in a leadership role in particular, to say nothing is to tell people it's okay, right? Is to tell that a leader thinks it's all right. On the other hand, I didn't want to destroy her in front of the group. And so in the moment, I had to think about what to do. So I was at the open part of the U-shaped table and I walked directly as close to her as I could. And I came close and I said, you know, I've heard you say that was a really embarrassing time, and I can only imagine what that felt like, but it sounds like you had a really good recovery to it. And I said, and I'm going to tell you one more thing. And then I went to the tabletop, said, I've got an invisible $1 million in my hand, and I'm going to put it down here, and you can have every penny of it if you promise me the next time you feel really incompetent or really like you've really messed up, you find a stronger word and a better word than retarded. Because all of us who know and love and care about someone who has an intellectual disability would really value you using a different word. And she was very embarrassed, right? Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And the thing that is important to do after that is, you know, help that person preserve their dignity. Because again, I saw no malicious intent. I saw ignorance. This was not someone who was attacking someone. This was not a bully beating someone up. This was someone who made a poor word choice, an uninformed word choice. And so not only did one of the things that is very helpful to do after you have one of those difficult conversations is to have a normalizing conversation afterwards. And so the minute there was a break in that, after that session, there's a break after we close, I went right out into the hall, followed her to talk with her and say, how you doing? I want to make sure you're all right. I realize that might have been uncomfortable. And then from then on in, make sure I had good conversations about a whole bunch of other things with her so that she didn't feel stigmatized permanently through that. Now, those are the ones that maybe are uncomfortable, but easier than some of the real tricky ones. I can tell you that when I started working, creating material for the Power Shift Project in the wake of the Me Too scandals in media, one of the things that we learned from EEOC research was that some of the most vulnerable people to sexual harassment were part-timers, temps, freelancers, and interns. And obviously, those are people who really want people to like them so that they can get permanent employment or they can get a good grade. And they're more vulnerable, and they're less likely to know the power structure well enough to do something about it. And they may even be afraid of doing something about it. So it was then that I realized that I had been in the industry for, what was then more than 25 years, and I had done so many career days where everybody says, you know, here's how to do your resume and do your LinkedIn profile, and here's your work ethic. Did I ever say to anyone, and here's what to do if you run into harassment as an intern or as a young employee? I'd never done it. And so I kind of made a promise to myself that knowing how vulnerable they are and the many stories that surfaced in 2017 when people started feeling like the window opened and they could talk about it, that I would start to put it into my conversations. Well, I can just tell you the first time I did a career night at Loyola, when there's a panel discussion and people are all talking about, you know, here's how to get ready for that job interview, here's how to dress for success. And then I say, and now I'd like to talk about harassment. and you could sort of see the air come out of the room. But I thought it was important. And I said, it's important to add this to the conversation, not because I'm going to predict it could happen to you, but I want you to all prepare for the possibility that it might. And with my students and with the students at Loyola and some other workshops that I've done, I said, with your permission, I want to do an exercise. If you're comfortable with this, would you let the person next to you put their hand on your arm like this? You just, each person reach over to the next person's arm. And when they do it, would you ask them to please take it away? Right? Just, you know, because that person's making you uncomfortable. All right. This is the person who's touching you in some way. And so, you know, the room bursts into laughter and stuff, right? Because they're all now putting their hands on each other's arm and they're all saying, would you please stop that? Could you please take your hand down? But what they said was that was kind of empowering, just to be in that moment, to know that you could say that and figure out how to get the words out. So that's kind of the run up to the more specific teaching. And let me just ask you before I pull up the dreaded PowerPoint, just by a show of hands, how many of you have found yourself in a situation where you saw something or heard something and you know, kind of thought in that moment, what's the right thing to do? Has it been an experience that you've had? Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that, that it's that normalized, because this is what I hear all the time. You know, how do you do the right thing the right way? So basically, you're witnessing something that you know is unjust or unfair or unkind or unsafe. So how do you respond? Or you see a need for change and you want to get other people on board. How do you start a conversation? When you find your voice, the question is, how do you be effective, whether it's in the moment or preparing to raise an issue? And what choices do you have, and how do you select the best option while being your authentic self? And I think that's what's really important. You know, I'm not asking you to be a phony. You have to be true to your values and yourself. So why do you think we hesitate? And you've got mics that you can open. So, and if you wouldn't mind, just so that we don't talk over each other, use that hand raise function. Why do we hesitate to have these tough conversations? I'm looking for that fabulous hand raising option. What causes us to hesitate?
I can go first.
Oh, hi, Samantha.
Hi. I mean, what comes to mind first is just that it's uncomfortable. Like,
Yeah.
it makes me uncomfortable, and I worry other people will be uncomfortable.
So what are you uncomfortable about? What's your worry?
Well, I know a lot of times these are sensitive topics, and I worry I'm not really that equipped to like say the right thing. So then I'm definitely pretty hesitant to say it like in front of a group, and definitely hesitant to say it in like a work environment.
Sure. Let's go to Jean and then Barbara.
We haven't played it out in advance with other people and practiced it. When I was starting and working with a lot of corporate people, I went to something that was put on by Women in Communications, and they were talking about how a man would put his arm over you, which is a sign of dominance, and what you could do if you're walking down the hall, and I did this, when you're walking down the hall, when a man puts his arm around you like that, your arm that's next to him, bring it out and put your hand around your arm around his waist. And guess what? That little teaching served me well in so many different ways, because if you follow that action with another action that's tested out. So I'm a great believer in training.
You know, Jean, it's actually the practice is so important. That's why I'm going to make sure we have time to do it here. I'll set up a little scenario that we can try. My experience with that was also, again, being one of the very few women. I mean, we've all experienced this, especially not so much recently, but over the years, where you'd be on a panel or something and they'd say, and now let's go to the most attractive member of our family, you know, our panel, the loveliest member, because you're the only woman on it. And it's like, good, that's just what I wanted, is for you to describe my looks instead of my intellect, right? But I would also deal with a lot of men who called me honey. Listen, honey. And I developed an immediate response. And now, Jean, it's almost as good as the, oh yeah, you're going to, you think you're going to own me? I'm going to own you. Whenever somebody called me honey, I would just say, that's right, Poopsie. And Poopsie always beats honey, right? Call a guy Poopsie and he realizes what the deal, what the game is. The game's over, right? They'll stop, right? Barbara?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that we tend not to do things is the fear of looking priggish. I mean, it depends. Obviously, there are some situations and some kinds of things where that's not an issue. But what comes to mind for me is that I'm on the board of a nonprofit, and the leader of the nonprofit is a woman in her 60s from the Midwest. And she says gal all the time. Now I say gal too. Mm-hmm. So I don't say it in a professional setting. I say it with friends. And it doesn't really bother me, but I notice it.
Yeah.
And I just can't bring myself to say anything to her, because I feel like I'm really, you're going to make an issue of gal. We got other fish to fry here.
Yeah.
We got more important things. So
sure. And it's potentially generational, and it's contextual. You're hearing it in how she's referring. Maybe she says guys too, and so it's almost an equalized thing. It would only be if you began to hear it in ways that really seemed like it was causing people to feel really uncomfortable. Let's go to Linda.
A big part of it, I think, for me, it seems like it comes down to not wanting to raise conflict, which is something that we've been trained to, that we don't want to go into conflict. And if you don't know how somebody, or if you're saying something uncomfortable and you don't know how somebody's going to react to what you're saying, even if you're doing it in as, polite a way possible, then you just want to avoid the conflict. And so I think that, to me, I think is probably the reason why I would shirk from those kinds of conversations.
We, in many cases, don't want to escalate something in ways that we can't predict. But, we're not alone. This is some research I found recently. If you were talking with a woman, you just met somebody, and you noticed a splotch of red marker on her nose, would you tell her, is the question. And I ask you to reflect on that. But here's what the research said. You're not alone if you'd prefer to remain silent. A recent study looking at whether and why people give constructive feedback found that only 4 out of 212 people surveyed told their survey provider that they had an unsightly smudge on their face. So they literally, the survey person had this thing on their face, and they wouldn't tell the person. But the field study points to an uncomfortable truth, even in cases where people have little to lose. This was just a survey person with a smudge. They withhold needed feedback from others who could use it. Part of the reason is that they underestimate how much other people crave feedback. And in an attempt to understand this gap, the researchers presented a series of situations in which feedback could help the survey participants. The scenarios range from having a stain on a shirt during a business meeting to bigger problems, like a tendency to interrupt colleagues or write rude emails. They asked participants on a 1 to 10 scale how much they'd want feedback in a particular situation versus how much they thought another person would want feedback. They found in every case, people rated their desire for feedback higher when they were imagining themselves the receiver than when they were imagining themselves as the giver. In fact, the more consequential the situation, the larger that gap seemed to be. And so what we are talking about is truly a balancing act. And if you do any study in conflict resolution, which I did during my master's program, they talk about this balancing act between your goal on one hand and your relationship on the other hand. Now, if you think about that for conflict purposes, it helps you sort of figure out your approach. Because there are times that, we can do it and have the goal and the relationship, both of them. There are some times where the goal is so important, we will sacrifice the relationship. Somebody's plagiarizing, right? The purpose of this meeting is to tell you that we are putting you on a suspension because we have reason to believe you've plagiarized. You're not as worried at that point about the relationship as you are about the goal. If you have someone who is saying something blatantly racist, if you are witnessing someone who is hitting on someone, in a situation where you see that it's a minor and you're going to intervene, that person might not like you anymore for doing that. You're willing to forego the relationship in order to meet the goal. You don't want to have to do that, but if you think about it from a newsroom perspective, it's the difference between, if you've got a noisy colleague in the next desk saying, "Shut the hell up," or saying to that person, "Listen, I don't think you know that when you're on the phone, your voice goes, an octave higher and louder, and I can't get my work done here." There's a big difference, right, between "shut the hell up" and "I'm not sure if you know." And if you want a good relationship, you're going to have the emotional intelligence not to do the "shut the hell up." There are also some times when our relationship is so important that we forego the goal. My boss calls meetings at times that, are really, I wish my boss wouldn't call meetings, and I'd rather not attend them. But it's my boss, I'm going to attend that meeting, right? So the relationship is more important than the goal. And in some cases, I really think that in a way, that's what Barbara's talking about. She's in the goal in the relationship. This is a chair of the board, an otherwise good person. The word is on the bubble. It is not, a massive pejorative. It's one step, elevated from girl, right? And so you're saying to yourself, is it important for me to call her out? And if I'm going to call her out, would I do it in a public setting, or would I sit down with her and say, I kind of go back and forth about this. There are a lot of women these days who are put off by the term gal. It sounds a lot like girl, and it's been used over the years to cause women to feel a little less important, a little less valued. And I'm telling you this just because I admire you so much and I respect what you do, that I thought you might at least want to know that it might not fall the way you think it's going to fall. Now, that would be one way that you might think about having that conversation. If you, in fact, feel that it might, you might want to talk to another person and say, "I'm hearing it this way. Does it bother you?" before you have that conversation, so that you know that you're not alone. But the balancing act is really important. And so there are going to be times. Carol, I see your hand up. Did you want to say something?
I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to
You
let
go
you
right
know.
ahead.
Well, I wanted to share some other information that I learned about the use of the word gal and how it can fall.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of deep listening and participation in Twitter spaces, especially in groups of marginalized communities. I've been involved in a lot of pro-democracy discussion groups with people in the Black community, Black women Democrats, and as well as coalitions of people from all different backgrounds. And something I learned is that the word gal is not comfortable for a Black woman to hear. And I don't know if anybody can guess why. but it's because it was a way that slave owners used to talk to their slaves.
Mm,
They use the word girl and gal, and that's the same, it's more familiar to us to understand that boy is an insult, right? We know that from movies. But apparently girl and gal carry the same trauma, generation to generation. So I just
boy,
wanted to say that.
I'm so glad you shared that, because again, that adds to, where we are now about why it adds to the urgency and the importance of us speaking up. I'm looking at the chat, also making sure I'm not missing what people have said. Angela says she admitted yesterday that she did not tell a man who reports to me that his fly was down when we were talking. Oh, listen, you got to use the thing. I'm a mother of 2 sons, XYZ, check your zipper. That's all you have to say and he'd know. And then, oh my gosh, McNelly, your former boss on TV who used to make fun of your accent and tell you to speak American. Oh my God. Well, that's a serious conversation. And again, but it's your boss. And so, the conversation with your boss needs to be one in which you are saying, we need to talk, or you need to talk to HR, obviously, because what that person is doing is absolutely out of line. So there are reactive conversations, okay? And the reactive conversations are the ones when we have to respond in the moment. And let's talk about active bystander. You are in a public place. A good example, the union representing restaurant workers did a study during the pandemic, released a study called Take Off Your Mask So I Know How Much to Tip You. And it was what was happening in a lot of restaurants to women in particular who were waitstaff. And there were people whose politics had them hating masks, and they were demanding that the waitstaff take off their masks, even though it was required either by law or by the restaurant, or it was a choice of the waitstaff for their own health and safety in the most dangerous times of when people started returning into public spaces. And the question would be, what would you do as an active bystander if you're at the table right next to a place where you see, a woman who's being hassled by somebody at the table saying, take off that damn mask, take off that damn mask. So I know how much to tip you, girl. Well, what would you do at a time like that? The person might be dangerous, right? The person who is going to be that obnoxious, while you want to help, you don't want to help in a way that is going to cause harm either to that waitstaff or to you. So the active bystander is someone who has options. And those options are, the acronym is CARE. You could confront, you could say, that's inappropriate, stop it. But if you think that's not safe based on your spidey sense of the situation, there are other things you can do. One would be to alert others. You get up and you go tell the manager, right? I think you ought to go to table so-and-so. Your waitstaff is being, your server is being given a hard time. Or you can redirect attention. You can call, excuse me, server, could I just get your attention over here? We have a problem at this table. And what you're doing is just breaking up that conversation. And then the engage after would be, all right, maybe all you could do in that moment is see it happen, but you're going to get up and you're going to follow that person who'd been harassed to say, I just want you to know, I support you fully. And if that person didn't give you a tip, I'm giving you twice the tip I would normally do. Something like that. So you've got all of those. And the same thing is if you see someone being harassed, in a public place. We don't want to put you in danger. You can confront, you can redirect, you can alert others, and you can engage after. One of my favorite stories, I had to testify before the EEOC when I started doing this work on the PowerShift project. They were doing a follow-up on their sexual harassment studies. And it was about the work that we were doing in the industry. But next to me was someone from the restaurant industry. And it was a woman who had a restaurant, and she found out that even though she was a woman-owned business, there were waitstaff that had not been telling her until Me Too about how much harassment they were getting from customers. and, being touched, being talked down to. And what she realized was that they didn't know if anybody in the organization would take them seriously. So she developed a color-coded system. And the color-coded system was that it was like yellow, or it was like green, yellow, and red, I think. And basically, if it was green and somebody was feeling uncomfortable, they would just go to their manager and say, I think I got a green at table 2. And that meant the manager was going to watch, but the person could stay on duty based on their choice. If they had a yellow, it was the manager's taking over the table. The server would still get the tips. And all you'd have to do is go to your manager and say, I got a yellow at that table. And that's somebody who's, either touching you or making suggestive comments. And then the third one was the red. And that was the person who's way out of line, and the manager or the person in charge comes over and tells them to leave. And they said it changed things entirely. And Angela, I know that after that, after hearing about that, Tracy Schweikert at Politico, and you may remember this, Angela, Tracy said that they realized that at some of their Politico social events that they were doing in DC, they used a lot of their youngest staff members and interns to help staff those. And she set up that very system in the event that someone was making them feel uncomfortable during that program. So depending on the situation, you also should know when to ask a question versus making a statement. And I will tell you that one of the most powerful things you can do is ask someone, what do you mean by that? My friend Keith Woods, who is VP of Diversity for NPR, tells the story. Keith is among the 8% of men in this world who are functionally colorblind. He can't discern certain colors from others. And so Keith is sometimes not aware of the exact color of something he's looking at. And as Keith tells the story, he was shopping for a car. Keith, if you don't know Keith, Keith is an African-American man. He is shopping for a car, and he is talking to a white car salesman. And as he looks at this car, he says to the white salesman, because he's not sure if it's navy blue or black. So he says to the salesman, is this a black car? And the salesman pauses and says, what do you mean by that? And Keith says, what do you mean by that? But Keith's point was that the salesman was brilliant, because the salesman didn't make an assumption. The white salesman looking at the black customer asking if this is a black car, he didn't say, yeah, all the brothers love him. He said, what do you mean by that? And that's when ultimately he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm colorblind. I don't know whether this is blue or black. And the salesman said, it's blue. So the point is, what do you mean by that can actually cause you to get more information, but it can also work really well when someone tells a joke that at its core is not funny. Well, I'm going to say this twice and a little slower, Jill, because I know you're blonde, right? And I say, really, what do you mean by that? And then the person has to say, well, yeah, I was like making a joke that blondes are dumb. Oh, I see. And the what do you mean by that works really well. So I will just tell you that in that moment, that's a very powerful phrase because it puts you in charge. On the other hand, if someone said, everybody knows blondes are stupid, Jill, I'm going to say that's patently offensive. You can't say that. What is important to do is to challenge measurable things like behavior and language and decisions, which you can objectively cite, rather than more ambiguous things like attitude or mindset, which can be harder to substantiate. So what I mean by that is, if I say to you, I think you've got a really bad attitude toward women in our meetings. Well, the person can say, no, I don't. I've got a wife, I got daughters, I've hired some of these women. What are you talking about? But if I say to someone, listen, in today's meeting, you talked more than anyone else. You cut off 2 women when they were speaking, and you said no to 3 ideas that women brought forward. And this is not the first time it's happened. So now I'm talking about behavior, okay? as opposed to attitude. Because really what we do is measure attitude by behavior. And I would just tell you this, whether or not it's about something that's a microaggression. You know, if I say to you, I think to anybody, you know, I think you have a bad attitude in our news meetings. And they say, no, I don't. And I'll say, you sit with your arms folded. You say, been there, done that to the story ideas. You roll your eyes. You say lame. When you do that, it chills the other people's willingness to offer ideas. So here's the situation. Here's the behavior. Here's the impact. It's kind of a formula of SBI. Here's the situation. We're in a news meeting. And when people throw out ideas, you have a tendency to do as you did this morning, saying, we've done that a million times. Now what I'm asking them to do is to stop a behavior, not to stop an attitude. You need to be so comfortable with what you say that you would be proud to have it published. And I think that's really important. I really feel like sometimes we say, okay, I just lost it. You know, I just lost it and I was like over the top in my response. No, you're not going to lose it. You're going to claim it. If you have to say, if you are walking into a room and you heard someone who you believe was being bullied, you know, you just heard someone say, this is the stupidest effing copy I have ever seen. Did you or did you not go to college? You know, if you're going to go into that, you may be really angry the way that person is speaking. But if you say something that escalates it, right? If you start yelling at that person, then you may undercut your own credibility. What you have to do is control the situation in an emotionally intelligent fashion by not letting yourself escalate. You're the one who's calm. That person is doing, this is effing stupid copy, and you're saying, there are better ways to say that. I'm going to step in right now. We don't have to talk this way. We're going to talk about copy in an entirely different way. And the more calm you become, right, the more in control you are. There's an amygdala in our brain. It's our fight, freeze, or flee reflex. When we get angry, when we get scared, it sends cortisol and it floods the front part of our brain, which is the executive function. It's why if you have a very serious medical test and you're going for results, they tell you to bring somebody along. It's the reason why you don't remember things really clearly sometimes after a really emotional moment or an angry moment, because your brain isn't working well. Now, when you have to do a proactive conversation, when you've got time to prepare, you know, you're thinking, you know, we do intern onboarding here, but we never talk about sexual harassment. So maybe we should add that to our onboarding. I'm going to bring that up in a meeting. And I know there are some people who are going to go, oh, come on, you know, why are you courting trouble? It's not going to happen here. So if I'm going to do that, how am I going to do it in a way that isn't going to cause a fight in a meeting? Well, first of all, if you start embedding your values into everyday communication, people are going to be much more accustomed to knowing that you're the person who's going to bring it up. If you are talking about equity in your conversations, if you are talking about the way we treat each other in our conversations, if you mention, you know, I'm trying not to be defensive because we all have something to learn about unconscious bias. And so you talk about that to people and you tell people to be, you know, that you're, if I ever say anything that causes you discomfort, I want you to tell me. You're going to be known as someone who holds others accountable, but holds yourself accountable. If you are going to make a presentation and you're going to be that person, right? Then do your homework. Present facts and context along with feelings. So if I'm going to come to that meeting and say, I want to make this presentation, or I'm going to make this pitch about adding sexual harassment, you know, here's how to report it in our intern onboarding, then I'm going to say, listen, I've got some material from the EEOC that says that even though we may not think it and we've never heard of it, it's happening and they are the most vulnerable and we'd never want to find out the hard way that it's happened. So we'd like to put it into our training. And that's not going to lead with it. It's just going to be one of many things on how to show how much it resonates with our values. So you're going to do your homework. You're going to have the information from the EEOC. Beforehand, you should also adopt an FAQ mindset, and that means anticipate questions people might have about your message. Is there going to be a legal problem if we do that? Is there going to be something that scares people away? Is it going to make it seem like we do have this as a problem? Those are the things you might anticipate. You might anticipate that someone says, well, are you trying to say that this is just men harassing women? When that isn't what you were going to say at all. You know, anyone is capable of being a perpetrator or a victim. And so you want to be ready, thinking about all the questions you might be asked. And then one important thing is to identify allies in advance. You know, it's a lot easier if you're going into a meeting and let's say Sharon and I are colleagues and I just go to Sharon and say, listen, when we have our group leaders meeting next week, I really want to bring this up and I was thinking of pitching this. What do you think? Is there anything you want to add or am I missing something? And Sharon says, well, you know who's going to be upset about it. So-and-so doesn't like it when we talk about these things, says we're being woke. And I'm going to say, yeah, and unfortunately that seems to be getting worse. So boy, I could use your help. And Sharon says, yeah, okay, I'll back you up. And so I bring it up and then the bandwagon effect takes place because I bring it up and I say, I'd like to pitch that we do this. And Sharon says, hey, that's a good idea. I've heard that some companies are really adopting this and it's actually an attractive part of their onboarding. And maybe I haven't just talked to Sharon, maybe I've talked to James. And then it really resonates because now James is going, yeah, I'm in on that too. I think that's really important. And I like the idea that we're going to do it early and we're going to make it a part of our values. So I got 2 or 3 people on board already, makes it a lot easier when I'm pitching this. And I'll be prepared with the next steps. Now, many times people will say, fine, then you do it. And I want to be really careful because I think we live in a time in which we don't want the people who've been victims of discrimination or inequity or injustice to have to be the people who do the work to solve it. That should always be the person's choice. I do a lot of work with emerging journalists. For example, at CBC in Canada, Canadian Broadcasting, I co-lead their Emerging Leaders Workshop because they have a real effort to accelerate the growth of traditionally underrepresented, or as they refer to it, equity-seeking individuals into leadership roles. And interestingly, as I was working with one of their employee resource groups, they had co-leaders, and it was their employee resource groups are for many interests. They have women in tech, they have women in color, they have something called the Abila Crew, which is for people with visible and invisible disabilities. They have LGBTQ plus employee resource groups. Well, one of those groups had 2 leaders. And one of the leaders, the co-leaders, when I was working with them said, I am the ask me anything person. They can come to me, I'll talk, I'm fine. And the other person said, I am so tired of doing this. I am tired of educating people, right? So you had 2 people who had entirely different desires in that moment, and that can change. So when we say be prepared with the next steps, if you care about something deeply and you have the capacity and desire, volunteer to do it, but don't feel like you have to, especially if it becomes invisible work. And I teach managers everywhere that we have put invisible work on too many underrepresented folks. It is translate for us. Would you recruit for us? Would you mentor for us? Would you represent us in the community? Would you serve on our diversity committee? Would you diversify this committee? And then, by the way, get the rest of your work done. And none of that is seen in your portfolio of major work. Jean, you have your hand up. Are you eager to speak, or is that hand just floating from before?
No, we're like on a volleyball team, and I absolutely want to amplify in a bit about what you're saying, which is this. You have, in so many structures, you have so many people who are invisible and not talk, yes? Mm-hmm. And you start thinking about it, but it's really helpful not to be so serious about it. You're doing everything exactly right. I'm saying, and I'm just amplifying what you're saying. A lot of people know that things are going on, but they have no one in the room that they know about. And humor always helps. And always saying, I may be mistaken about this, but don't. So I think, and you're prepared for the next steps. It's great to have conversations going on and with humor. And I've been taking pictures of everything that you put here because I know that you're saying things. And then when you live that out in life, you always have things happen when you're not prepared.
Oh, that's true, Jean. And to your point about humor, I just want to tell you that after a lifetime of having people, literally one of the first things that was said to me that was offensive when I was pitching for a reporting job was a general manager who said, "Sister, you've got balls." And he thought it was a compliment. And so what I learned after that was that I'd be in many meetings over the years and somebody'd say, "Well, it's going to be rough. Do we have the balls to do it?" And I'd say, "Well, I don't know. If it gets any harder, you might need ovaries." And, basically telling a group of men, do you all have the ovaries to do this? That's the perfect response after somebody uses the highest compliment is the other. And again, they've used it because it's been part of their all growing up, right? Cojones, balls, all of that. So I am just going to say, hey, and then there's one even greater, and that's ovaries. And they get it, right? So bless you, Jean, for bringing that up. For all conversations, I just want to tell people to avoid hyperbolic language. It gets you in trouble, always, worst, never, because those things people can challenge and you probably won't be accurate, right? So be specific, work on your specificity, not your florid adjectives. Attack problems rather than people. I think this is really important. Every now and then, yes, there's going to be someone who is themselves toxic, but it's the behavior, it's the action, it's the impact that we want to talk about. So again, it is, here's the situation, here's the behavior, here's the impact. Be open to genuine apologies and change. This is hard. One of the things that again, I've learned from Keith Woods is that when you have talked to someone, if you heard someone making a joke about a religion, not their own, and you come to them and say, I just heard you making jokes about Mormon underwear. Do you understand how that's sacred to Mormons? And I want you to know that because you may be saying that in the presence of someone for whom that is a part of their religious tradition. And from that moment on, they may think they've been branded in your eyes, as a racist or a sexist or a homophobe. And what you want to do is, if they say, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't know," then be open to the idea that that apology is real. And again, yes, there may be serial offenders, but there are also people, including ourselves, who learn as they go. And the other thing is know how to escalate. Know when you need to take it to someone else, all right? Know when keeping it to yourself is not wise and it's going to cause it to go on. Many times we don't want to make a big deal out of something, but what we discovered when all the Me Too stories broke, when the racial reckoning happened in newsrooms and so many people started to say, "I can speak now," okay, this window of opportunity is open because for this moment you're paying attention, then people who have not had a voice, they start to speak. And they have not felt they could escalate things. So if somebody comes to you and says, and I've had this happen, "This is happening to me, don't tell anybody." One of the things you may have to do is to talk with them about what's going to happen if we don't. And how can I help protect you using whatever power I have if we need to report that you are terribly uncomfortable with the way you are treated when you walk into that office, or when you and many times, as we all know, some of the first things are low level. It's like people test us. You know, it's a couple of jokes or it's a couple of things that, you know, maybe we don't object to, and then it builds. So know when and how in your organization to escalate. And now, before we run out of time, because we just have 6 minutes left, at least we'll do one real-time practice. And my real-time practice, let's make it an easy one. I'll need a volunteer, right? And here's the scenario. We're in a meeting. Okay, we're all in a meeting. And Maria is one of our colleagues. And Maria makes a suggestion on something that we could be doing. And there's not much response to it. And Maria actually says it, as women often do, this might be a dumb idea. And I don't know why we do that, and we should stop. You know, we sort of self-deprecate. Now, I don't know if anybody's going to agree with this, or, you know, this is just blue sky now. But that's what she did. And then the meeting went on. And sure enough, Joe, a little bit later, says the same idea. I mean, almost, you know, I mean, it's the same deal. And people start going, you know, we could do that. And you're hearing that. Okay, who's my volunteer for what you would be comfortable saying in the meeting at that moment when Maria has said it, and now nothing much happens. And then Joe says much the same thing and starts to get reaction. Who's my volunteer? Let's see. Anybody got a hand up? Fish. Okay. What are we going to say?
You know, Maria mentioned that just a couple of moments ago, and I thought it was a good idea too. Maria, would you like to explain a little more about what you were proposing?
Yep. Now, why? Somebody tell me why that worked so well.
It's specific, it names her name.
Yep. What else?
It also throws the ball back to her so she can take ownership of it.
Yes. And interestingly, we didn't say, hey, dude, you know, she just said that. Why are you stealing her idea? Because interestingly, there's research that says that because we oftentimes lead with an apology, people don't hear our idea fully, or we truncate it, we make it short. And then later on, the person who has heard it and really develops it more says it more definitively, and people do hear it. So it isn't just that someone is stealing the idea, it's that they were actually not hearing it very well there. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, because it happens to women a lot. You know, they throw out an idea, it doesn't get traction. Somebody who appears to have power says it and gets more traction. But we're not sure. I mean, if this person was a serial idea stealer, we may say something like, Joe, come on, you know, that was, you know, Maria's. But the way Fish did it, it literally got you a goal and a relationship. The only other thing I would say is that I would keep an eye on Maria, because maybe she wants to speak for herself, right? And so before I automatically jumped in and assumed that she was not capable of responding, I would kind of give her, you know, take a look and see if she's ready to. And Angela says, everyone who has done this for me, I remember, and I can name the names. And Alyssa, yeah, you're saying a softer way. That sounds similar to what, yeah. And you can easily say, you know what, Joe? That makes sense. I think that's what Maria was aiming at when she brought it up a little while ago. Maria, say more, would you? And it just becomes part of the flow. But what you're doing is elevating someone else, and you're that amplifier, right? So I know that practice, and Jean said, practice is the most important. If you are going to, if you feel the need to it, whether it's something as simple as practicing with somebody about doing, you know, putting a hand on the shoulder and saying, take it off, or whether it's preparing for a tough conversation and rehearsing it with a friend, practice really helps. So as you do this, were there some key takeaways from today? I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but I'm so glad we were able to do this time. You want to write your takeaways in the chat really quickly? If there's one thing you're going to take away from this, Linda says care. Sana says, how to intervene when someone is asked to do unpaid work and it's yes. Well, I will say the Spanish speaker being asked to translate or a woman being asked to bring in office food. For the translate, I'm going to say one thing that I heard in one of my classes, and it's from, and I'm quoting him because I'm calling it the Bank rule with his permission. Ryan Bank from WAMU said, I have a new rule as a bilingual person. I really believe that if I translate your story and you couldn't have done it without me, I ought to have a byline. And I thought, think about it. If more newsrooms adopted that, it would make perfect sense. Now, if someone is being asked to do invisible work, then what we might do is have a talk with our managers and say, I'm hearing a lot. I just want to give you a heads up. I'm hearing a lot in professional circles about this idea of invisible work and asking people to translate when it wasn't in their job description and they're not getting any extra credit for it or extra pay. How do we make sure that that person feels at least very respected for it, right? And maybe it will show up in their performance review. And ideally, they'd get more money too. And the office housework, which Sana, you talked about, women being asked to bring in the office food. There's a whole lot of literature about how women volunteer for office housework and how it becomes really important for us. If we love to cook, and that's us, if we want to do it, that's one thing. And if we know that people's birthdays wouldn't be celebrated if we didn't do it, and we want it to be that way in our team, that's one thing. But you can also just say, we'd like to start distributing things. The food might not be as good because somebody might buy what you bake, but I think it really just is a conversation around, I had a boss who literally had elevated so many women to management that when we had guests from outside the station, he would pour coffee for everybody because he was terrified that our guests from outside would think that he forced the women to do it. So he would pour all the coffee and then he'd get near me and he'd whisper in my ear, I gotta hire more guys. And then he'd go on. But he was aware of the symbolism. And I think we can talk to people about that symbolism. So I'm looking at your comments, everybody, and I don't want to keep you long, but I'm looking at your takeaway. Distraction, redirecting. Yeah, Jennifer, and that's not cowardly. That actually is powerful. You don't have to confront, you can interrupt the thing. I want to tell you as a friend, I think this is so important. I'm telling you this because it would be wrong of me to know it's happening and not tell you. Alyssa, I think that's really helpful. And yes, paying attention to that language, like, ladies and gals. What do you mean by that is really helpful. Goal and relationship, absolutely. So as we wrap up, Fish is going to post these tips. I know Jean was taking pictures and I think that's great, but I also have a summary for you. And then let me just make a shameless pitch. I do teach an online masterclass for media managers for Loyola, and they use the tuition to help fund scholarships. And so if you are interested or your organization is interested in sending someone to my Loyola masterclass for media managers, then take this information. You can actually use the QR code right now if you'd like. I'll leave that up. And I'm also going to put my, let me just get into the chat. If I ever can be of help to any of you, if you're running into a challenge, you just want to talk to somebody and talk through it, and you got the tip sheet? All right. And let me just give you my email address. Reach out and I will happily talk you through if you have one of these conversations or situations you need to address. Send me a note, we'll set up a chat. And that's what JAWS does for people in JAWS or people who care about JAWS, and we do it as a volunteer. Okay, everybody. Good to see you.
Thanks so much, Jill. This was so good. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who participated. If you are not a JAWS member, you could go to jaws.org and join today. And I would like to say that next month, our incoming president later this year, Angela Greeling King, and person who's Lottie Joyner are going to be doing a talk about should I stay or should I go I'll be playing the Clash at the start, but really they're going to be talking about how you make decisions about whether to leave a job or whether to stick with it. And I think that will be a great webinar. But Jill, we praise you so much. Thank you
Can I
so
just add
much.
one more thing? James,
Yes.
I would like to thank you for showing up. On behalf of all the women of JAWS, welcome.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Cool. Thank you.
take care,
And-
everybody.
More later.
Thank you so much for setting this up too. What a great webinar.